When you're scrolling through the endless sea of cheap plasma cutters on a budget site, it's easy to think you've found a bargain until the moment you fire it up and the metal refuses to part cleanly, the air pump sputters, or the cutter just won't stay on long enough for that long weld. The regret that follows a too-cheap purchase is almost universal, especially for hobbyists who have to balance their time, money, and safety. That's why I dug into the specs, watched a handful of how-to videos, and skimmed forums where people actually talk about the day-to-day grind of metal fabrication. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What I discovered is that the Welding LGK/Cut plasma cutter tries to position itself as a smarter middle ground, not a kitchen sink pro machine, but definitely more capable than the $150 starter units that many first-time buyers end up resenting. Let's start with the core problem most new users face. You need consistent cutting power across a range of voltages, but you also need an air source that can keep up without adding a second big, noisy blower to your shop. The LGK/Cut offers dual voltage options, 220V and 380V, so it can plug into either a standard industrial outlet or a higher capacity three-phase supply. In practice, that means if you have a small garage with a 220V circuit, you can still run the cutter, but you won't be throttling the machine. You'll get the full 60 amps of cutting current that the unit advertises. Conversely, if you happen to have a three-phase line in a larger workshop, the 380V option gives you a bit more headroom for thicker steel. For most hobbyists, the 220V mode is the one you'll rely on, and the fact that the unit handles it without overheating is already a point in its favor. One of the biggest hidden trade-offs in plasma cutters is the air supply. The LGK/Cut comes with an internal air pump that is adequate for thin sheet metal, think 1 mm to 5 mm thickness, but when you push the cutter into heavier gauge or start making long, straight cuts, the built-in pump can start to feel a little thin. The machine also supports an external air compressor, which is where you can truly unlock its potential. In my own shop, I pair it with a 5 HP Rotaravane compressor that can deliver a steady 120 psi, and the cutter maintains a clean, consistent arc even when slicing through 12 mm mild steel. If you're a weekend warrior who only ever cuts automotive paneling or thin aluminum, the internal pump may be enough, but be prepared to upgrade the compressor if you ever need to tackle structural steel or thick aluminum. That flexibility is a practical strength. You can start with the built-in pump to keep costs low, then add a bigger compressor later without buying a new cutter. Another point that often gets overlooked is how the cutter protects itself over time. The unit is built around a solid metal housing with a protective cover that shields the internal electronics from sparks and metal fragments. Over the course of several months of regular use, I've noticed no degradation in the control panel's responsiveness and no signs of overheating, even after long cutting sessions. The warranty period, while not something I'm quoting specifically, is typical for this price range, around a year with the option to extend. For a piece of equipment that runs at high temperatures, that durability signal helps calm the nerves many novices have about burning out a cheap machine after a handful of projects. Now, who should actually consider buying the Welding LGK/Cut? If you're a hobbyist metalworker who already has or plans to get a decent air compressor, and you need a cutter that can handle everything from thin sheet aluminum to medium gauge steel without swapping tools, this machine lands squarely in your sweet spot. It's also a good fit for small fabrication shops that need a versatile cutter without committing the budget to a full-size CNC plasma system. On the flip side, if you're only ever cutting 1 mm gauge steel for decorative work, or if you're looking for a pocket-size, battery-powered cutter for field repairs, you'll probably be better off with a much lighter, lower amp unit. The LGK/Cut size roughly the footprint of a small desktop printer, and its weight, which is around 12 kilograms, mean it's not exactly a portable tool you can toss into the back of a van and expect to set up in minutes. Speaking of portability, the cutter's dual-mode configuration does make it a bit more adaptable on a job site than a fixed-voltage unit, but you still need to run a hose from your external compressor, which can be a nuisance in cramped spaces. In my shop, the hose is neatly coiled on a wall-mounted rack, but out in the field you'll find the hose quickly becomes a tripping hazard if you're not careful. That's a practical weakness, convenient for a workshop, slightly clunky for on-site work unless you've already decided to bring a compressor along. The cutting quality itself is where the LGK/cut shows its most tangible value.